The universe contains 2 trillion galaxies. 400 billion stars burn inside our Milky Way alone. Planets outnumber every grain of sand on Earth. The chemistry of life is written into the fabric of the cosmos itself. And yet, when we point our most powerful telescopes at the sky, when we listen across every frequency, we find nothing. No signals, no structures, no evidence that anyone else has ever existed. This silence is not just strange, it is terrifying. Because somewhere between dead chemistry and a civilization capable of crossing the stars, there may be a wall so absolute that nearly everything that has ever lived in this universe crashed into it and vanished. Scientists call it the Great Filter, and we do not know which side of it we are on. If this question keeps you awake at night the way it does for scientists around the world, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's begin. Look up on a clear night from a dark hillside far from city lights. The sky fills with stars. A few thousand are visible to the naked eye, scattered across the blackness in familiar patterns that humans have named and navigated by for millennia. It feels like a lot. It feels like the universe is crowded. But those few thousand points of light are a rounding error. They represent a vanishingly thin slice of what actually surrounds you. Our galaxy alone contains somewhere between 200 billion and 400 billion stars. Most of them are too faint or too distant to see without a telescope. Many are hidden behind vast clouds of interstellar dust that absorb their light before it ever reaches your eyes. The stars you see on any given night account for less than 1/10,000,000th of the Milky Way's total stellar population. You are looking at the universe through a keyhole and mistaking it for a window. Now multiply our galaxy by what lies beyond it. In 2016, a study using deep field observations from the Hubble Space Telescope estimated that the observable universe contains roughly 2 trillion galaxies. Some are spirals like our own. Others are giant ellipticals harboring over 1 trillion stars each. Dwarf galaxies contain only a few billion, but averaged together, these 2 trillion galaxies hold a combined stellar population that exceeds 10 to the 24th power individual stars. That is a 1 followed by 24 zeros. It is a number so far beyond human experience that no analogy captures it faithfully, though this one comes close. There are more stars in the observable universe than grains of sand on every beach on every continent on Earth. And that comparison is conservative. Some estimates push the star count even higher. Every single one of those stars is a furnace of nuclear fusion. Many of them burn for billions of years, and around the overwhelming majority of them, planets form. This is no longer speculation. It is confirmed. In 1995, astronomers detected the first planet orbiting a sun-like star, a gas giant called 51 Pegasi b, that stunned the scientific community by sitting absurdly close to its host star. That discovery cracked open a door. In the 3 decades since, the planet count has exploded. NASA's Kepler Space Telescope, launched in 2009, spent nearly a decade monitoring over 150,000 stars for the tiny dips in brightness caused by planets passing in front of them. It found thousands. The Transiting Exoplanet Survey satellite, known as TESS, has continued this census across the entire sky. As of September 2025, NASA's official tally of confirmed exoplanets crossed 6,000, and those 6,000 represent only the planets we have managed to detect with current instruments. The true number in our galaxy alone is staggering. Statistical models built from Kepler data suggest that nearly every star in the Milky Way hosts at least one planet. Many host several. Conservative estimates place the total planetary population of our galaxy at hundreds of billions. Some models push it past 1 trillion. Not all of these worlds are relevant to the question of life. Gas giants like Jupiter offer no solid surface. Planets baking in close orbits around their stars are sterilized by radiation. Frozen worlds drifting in the outer darkness may lack the liquid water that every known form of biology requires. But between these extremes sits a region astronomers call the habitable zone, the orbital distance from a star where temperatures allow liquid water to persist on a rocky surface. It is sometimes called the Goldilocks zone. As of 2026, Approximately 97 confirmed exoplanets sit inside the conservative habitable zones of their host stars. That is 97 individual worlds where the basic thermal conditions for life as we understand it are met. And that number only counts the planets we have found so far around the stars we have studied in detail. Extrapolating across the full galaxy, researchers estimate that billions of rocky planets orbit within habitable zones throughout the Milky Way. Billions. Not millions. Billions. These worlds are not theoretical. They are our neighbours. The ingredients for life are not rare either. This is one of the most important and least appreciated facts in modern astronomy. The chemistry that biology depends on, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, the elements that form amino acids and nucleotides and cell membranes, is woven into the fabric of the cosmos. These elements are forged inside stars through nuclear fusion. When massive stars die in supernova explosions, they scatter those elements across interstellar space, seeding gas clouds that eventually collapse to form new stars and new planetary systems. The cycle has been repeating for over 13 billion years. Organic molecules, the carbon-based compounds that serve as building blocks for biology, have been found in interstellar dust clouds, on the surfaces of comets and asteroids, and even in the atmospheres of exoplanets. The amino acid glycine has been detected in material collected from a comet. Complex organic compounds were found in samples returned from the asteroid Ryugu by Japan's Hayabusa 2 mission. The chemistry of life is not something Earth invented. It is something the universe manufactures constantly and distributes everywhere. So the raw materials are abundant, the real estate is plentiful, planets are common, habitable conditions are not rare, and the universe has had nearly 14 billion years to work with. Even if life is difficult to start, even if the odds are long for any single world, the sheer number of opportunities should compensate. Multiply a small probability by hundreds of billions of chances, and you get a large expectation. Run that experiment across 2 trillion galaxies, and the number becomes almost incomprehensible. By every reasonable calculation, the universe should be teeming with life. It should hum with biological activity. If even a tiny fraction of habitable worlds develop simple organisms, the cosmos should be crawling with microbes. If even a tiny fraction of those worlds produce something intelligent, the galaxy should contain thousands, perhaps millions of technological civilizations. Some of them should be millions of years older than ours, with technology so advanced it would appear to us as magic. And yet the sky is silent. This is not a poetic observation. It is an empirical fact. For over 6 decades, scientists have been actively searching for evidence that someone else is out there. The search has grown from modest radio experiments to a global effort involving some of the most powerful instruments ever built. And it has found nothing. Not one confirmed signal, not one unambiguous artifact, not one structure, transmission, or signature that requires an intelligent origin. The organized search began in 1959 when physicists Giuseppe Cocconi and Philip Morrison published a paper in the journal Nature proposing that radio waves would be a natural medium for interstellar communication. The following year, astronomer Frank Drake pointed a radio telescope at 2 nearby sun-like stars and listened for artificial signals. He heard nothing. In 1961, Drake convened the first formal conference on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence and introduced his famous equation, a framework for estimating how many communicative civilizations might exist in the galaxy. The equation was never meant to provide a precise answer. It was meant to organize the question. But the numbers it generates, even with conservative inputs, consistently suggest that we should not be alone. Since those early days, the search has expanded enormously. Radio telescopes have scanned millions of stars across wide frequency ranges. Optical telescopes have looked for laser pulses that an advanced civilization might use to communicate across interstellar distances. The closest we have ever come to a detection only deepens the mystery. On August 15, 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University recorded a burst of radio energy, so strong and so unusual that the astronomer reviewing the data circled the readout and wrote a single word in the margin: wow. The signal, designated 6EQUJ5, lasted 72 seconds. It came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. It matched the expected profile of an interstellar transmission on the hydrogen frequency, exactly the channel that Cocconi and Morrison had proposed as a natural communication band 18 years earlier. And then it vanished. It never repeated. Despite decades of follow-up observations pointed at the exact same region of sky, the signal has never been detected again. It remains unexplained. Most scientists believe it was likely a natural phenomenon or a terrestrial artifact, but no definitive explanation has ever been confirmed. If it was an attempt at contact, whoever sent it said one word and then went quiet forever. The Breakthrough Listen initiative, launched in 2015 with $100 million in funding, became the most comprehensive search for technosignatures ever undertaken. It uses the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, the Parkes Telescope in Australia, and the Meerkat Array in South Africa to survey nearby stars, nearby galaxies, and unusual objects with unprecedented sensitivity and frequency coverage. A 2025 study using Green Bank Telescope archival data concluded that fewer than 1% of surveyed stars host detectable transmitters broadcasting in our direction, even at power levels comparable to our own strongest radar systems. In 2025, a revolutionary artificial intelligence system deployed by Breakthrough Listen achieved a 600-fold increase in signal processing speed, with 7% better accuracy, reducing false positives by nearly a factor of 10. The tools are becoming sharper. The results remain the same. The silence is not a result of insufficient effort. We have listened carefully, broadly, and with increasing precision. The cosmos does not answer. The silence deepened further when the interstellar object 3I Atlas was discovered on July 1, 2025. It was only the third object ever detected entering our solar system from beyond, following the still-debated Oumuamua in 2017 and the interstellar comet Borisov in 2019. Given the small number of known interstellar visitors and the theoretical possibility that advanced civilizations might send probes between star systems, Breakthrough Listen trained multiple telescopes on 3I Atlas as it approached Earth. The Allen Telescope Array observed it in early July 2025. Meerkat searched the data using dedicated technosignature detection equipment. Observations continued through the object's closest approach in December. The result, reported by the SETI Institute, was unambiguous. No technosignatures were detected in any of these searches. The object behaved exactly like a natural comet, outgassing as it heated near the sun, producing hydroxyl signatures consistent with water ice breaking apart under solar radiation. Its nucleus was a typical cometary size. Its non-gravitational acceleration was consistent with standard outgassing physics. Nothing unusual, nothing artificial, just another rock from another star, drifting silently through our neighborhood. In the same year, Breakthrough Listen published results from a technosignature search targeting 27 eclipsing exoplanets selected from the TESS catalogue. The idea was elegant. When a planet passes in front of its host star from our perspective, any artificial emissions from that planet would briefly be silhouetted against the stellar background, potentially making them easier to detect. The survey covered a range of radio frequencies and employed sophisticated algorithms designed to identify narrowband signals drifting in frequency, the type of pattern that natural astrophysical sources rarely produce, but that a transmitter on a rotating planet would create. The results were published in 2025. No credible technosignature candidates were found. Every detected signal was traced back to human-made radio interference on Earth. The planet stayed quiet. The technique was new, the silence was not. This is the landscape in which the Fermi paradox lives. The phrase traces back to a summer day in 1950, when physicist Enrico Fermi sat at lunch with colleagues at Los Alamos National Laboratory. The conversation had turned to flying saucers and the possibility of extraterrestrial visitors. Fermi, famous for his ability to estimate physical quantities on the fly, reportedly worked through the numbers in his head: the age of the galaxy, the number of stars, the time it would take a civilization to spread across interstellar distances even at modest speeds. He looked up and asked a question that has haunted science ever since. Where is everybody? The question sounds simple. Its implications are anything but. If the galaxy is roughly 13 billion years old, and if sun-like stars have been forming throughout that history, and if planets are common, and if life arises with any reasonable frequency, then civilizations should have emerged millions or even billions of years before our own. A civilization with even modest technology, nothing more than self-replicating probes traveling at a fraction of the speed of light, could theoretically explore or colonize every star system in the Milky Way within a few tens of millions of years. That sounds like a long time by human standards. On the cosmic clock, it is barely a heartbeat. The galaxy has had time for this to happen hundreds of times over. And yet there are no probes in our solar system, no artifacts on the moon, no megastructures visible around nearby stars, no signals arriving from any direction. The expected abundance of intelligent life and the observed emptiness of the sky do not match. That contradiction is the Fermi paradox. Many solutions have been proposed. Perhaps intelligent life is far rarer than optimistic calculations suggest. Perhaps civilizations exist but choose not to communicate, staying deliberately hidden for reasons we cannot fathom. Perhaps they communicate in ways we cannot detect, using technologies so advanced that our radio telescopes are as useless as smoke signals in the age of fiber optics. Perhaps the distances between stars are simply too vast for any civilization to bridge, no matter how advanced. Perhaps they are out there, but we have not looked long enough, or in the right places, or at the right frequencies. Each of these explanations has supporters and detractors. None can be ruled out completely. But there is one explanation that cuts deeper than all the others, because it does not merely explain the silence. It warns us about what the silence might mean. In 1996, economist and futurist Robin Hanson published a paper titled "The Great Filter, Are We Almost Past It?" In it, he formalized an idea that had been floating at the edges of astrobiology and philosophy for years. Hanson observed that between the formation of a habitable planet and the emergence of a civilization capable of colonizing the galaxy, there lies a long chain of necessary steps. Each step must succeed for the next to become possible. Dead chemistry must become living chemistry. Simple cells must become complex cells. Single-celled organisms must become multicellular. Multicellular life must develop nervous systems, brains, intelligence. Intelligent species must develop technology. Technological civilizations must survive long enough to expand beyond their homeworld. This chain is long, and every link must hold. The great filter is the hypothesis that at least one of these steps is so extraordinarily unlikely, or so extraordinarily dangerous, that it eliminates the vast majority of potential civilizations before they ever become visible. It is the wall that almost nobody climbs over, the bottleneck that almost nobody passes through, the step where the universe says no. This hypothesis does not require every civilization to fail at the same point. Different species on different worlds might stumble at different stages, but the filter predicts that the cumulative difficulty of the entire chain is so severe that the end result, a galaxy-spanning civilization, almost never happens. That is why the sky is quiet, not because the universe is hostile, not because the laws of physics forbid interstellar travel, but because somewhere along the path from raw chemistry to a species that lights up the galaxy, there is a step that almost nothing survives. This idea would be merely interesting if it were only about alien civilizations. It becomes terrifying when you realize it applies to us. The great filter must exist somewhere along the chain. The critical question is where. There are exactly two possibilities, and they lead to radically different conclusions about humanity's future. The first possibility is that the filter is behind us. Perhaps one or more of the early steps, the origin of life, the evolution of complex cells, the development of intelligence, was so staggeringly improbable that Earth is one of the only places it ever happened. If this is true, then we have already passed through the hardest part. We are rare. We are lucky. The silence of the cosmos is not a warning. It is a testament to our improbability. Other worlds have oceans and atmospheres and organic chemistry, but almost none of them ever make the leap to life, or to complexity, or to minds that ask questions about the stars. In this scenario, the universe is not dangerous. It is simply empty. The second possibility is that the filter is ahead of us. Perhaps life is common. Perhaps complex cells evolve frequently. Perhaps intelligence arises on many worlds. But perhaps technological civilizations, once they reach a certain point, almost always destroy themselves. Nuclear war, runaway climate collapse, artificial intelligence turned against its creators, engineered pandemics, resource depletion, or something we have not even imagined yet. In this scenario, the silence of the cosmos is not reassuring. It is a graveyard. Every quiet star system might represent a world where a civilization rose, built, dreamed, and then crashed into the filter and was annihilated. The sky is silent because everyone who might have spoken is already dead. This is what makes the Great Filter the most frightening idea in science. It does not tell us which answer is correct. It tells us that one of these two realities is true, and we do not have enough information yet to determine which one. Every new discovery in astrobiology shifts the balance. Every exoplanet in a habitable zone, every detection of organic chemistry on a distant world, every potential biosignature on Mars changes the calculus. And as we are about to see, the evidence from Earth's own history offers tantalizing clues about which steps were hardest and whether the worst of the journey might already be over. If the Great Filter exists, its location changes everything. A filter in the past means we are rare. A filter in the future means we are doomed. So the most urgent question in astrobiology is not whether the filter is real, it is whether humanity has already passed through it. To answer that, we need to examine every major transition in the history of life on Earth and ask a simple but unnerving question about each one. How hard was this step really? And could it have failed to happen at all? The first step is the one that matters most. Before anything else could follow, before cells could divide, before organisms could evolve, before brains could form and hands could build, something had to cross a line that no known process in the universe has ever been observed to cross a second time. Non-living chemistry had to become living chemistry. Dead molecules had to organize themselves into a system capable of metabolism, replication, and hereditary variation. Scientists call this transition abiogenesis. It is the moment when matter started doing something it had never done before. It started copying itself. On Earth, this transition appears to have happened quickly, geologically speaking. The planet formed roughly 4.5 billion years ago. For the first several 100 million years, it was essentially molten, bombarded by asteroids, sterilized by impacts so massive they could vaporize entire oceans. Conditions only stabilized enough for liquid water to persist on the surface around 4 billion years ago, give or take. The earliest plausible evidence of life, chemical signatures preserved in ancient rocks, dates to roughly 3.8 billion years ago. That leaves a window of perhaps 200 to 500 million years between when life could have started and when it apparently did. In geological terms, that is fast. Almost suspiciously fast. Some researchers have used this speed to argue that abiogenesis must be relatively easy. If life arose quickly on Earth, perhaps it arises quickly everywhere. But this reasoning contains a trap. We are only able to observe worlds where life did arise, because we are the product of that event. If the origin of life is genuinely rare, occurring on only 1 in a billion habitable planets, then the only observers who would ever exist to study the question would necessarily find themselves on that one lucky world. They would look at the geological record, note that life appeared quickly, and conclude it must have been easy. They would be wrong. This is a textbook example of survivorship bias. You cannot draw conclusions about the general probability of an event by studying only the cases where the event succeeded. The actual chemistry of abiogenesis remains one of the deepest unsolved problems in science. As of 2026, no single hypothesis commands scientific consensus. Researchers have proposed multiple pathways. The RNA world hypothesis suggests that self-replicating molecules of ribonucleic acid preceded modern cells, acting as both genetic material and catalysts. The metabolism first hypothesis proposes that networks of chemical reactions arose before any genetic material existed. Others argue that life began in hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, where mineral surfaces could catalyze reactions and thermal gradients could concentrate molecules. Still others propose shallow ponds on land, where wet-dry cycles could build longer molecular chains, or even ice, where freezing conditions can paradoxically accelerate certain chemical reactions by concentrating reactants in liquid veins between ice crystals. Each of these proposals has experimental support in isolated fragments. None of them has produced a complete, self-sustaining protocell from plausible prebiotic chemistry. A 2025 study from Imperial College London, published by researcher Robert Endres, developed a mathematical framework grounded in information theory and algorithmic complexity to evaluate the difficulty of assembling structured biological information under realistic early Earth conditions. The results were sobering. The entropic and informational barriers to forming a viable protocell within the available time window are far greater than many previous estimates had suggested. The study did not claim that abiogenesis was impossible. It demonstrated that the spontaneous assembly of even a minimal self-replicating system requires a convergence of conditions so specific that treating it as a routine chemical inevitability is unjustified. Progress has been made in pieces. A 2026 paper published in Science demonstrated that a 45 nucleotide ribozyme called QT45 can synthesize both itself and its complementary strand, a meaningful step towards self-replication. But this system was engineered in a laboratory under carefully controlled conditions. Whether anything comparable could arise spontaneously in a tide pool or a volcanic vent on an early planet remains deeply uncertain. A 2025 assessment from the Royal Society concluded that there is no established single scenario for the origin of life, and that the required conditions for different proposed stages are often mutually incompatible, meaning they could not all have occurred in the same place at the same time. The field increasingly favours hybrid, multi-stage pathways in which different phases of pre-biological chemistry occurred in different environments and were somehow linked together. But the mechanisms for that linking remain speculative. As of 2026, a $10 million prize offered by wealthy philanthropists for a plausible naturalistic explanation of life's origin remains unclaimed. What all of this means for the Great Filter is profound. If the origin of life is genuinely one of the hardest things in the universe, requiring an almost miraculous convergence of chemistry, environment, and timing, then it could be the filter all by itself. Most habitable planets might have oceans, organic molecules, energy sources, and billions of years of opportunity, and still never produce a single living cell. Earth might be an extraordinarily rare exception. In that case, we would expect to find the universe exactly as we observe it. Quiet, empty, billions of potentially habitable worlds sitting in silence, because the first and most fundamental step simply never happened on any of them, or almost none of them. But life's origin, however improbable, is only the beginning of the chain. Even if we grant that abiogenesis occurred, the next step in the sequence contains a bottleneck so severe that it stalled all progress on Earth for roughly 2 billion years. For the first half of life's history on this planet, nothing complex existed. From roughly 3.8 billion years ago until approximately 1.5 to 2 billion years ago, every living thing on Earth was a prokaryote, a simple cell with no nucleus, no internal compartments, no mitochondria. Bacteria and archaea dominated the planet completely. They colonized every available environment at need, from boiling hot springs to frozen Antarctic rocks, from deep ocean trenches to the upper atmosphere. They evolved an astonishing diversity of metabolic strategies. Some ate sunlight, others ate sulfur, iron, hydrogen gas, or the chemical energy seeping from volcanic vents. They reshaped the planet's atmosphere, filling it with oxygen through photosynthesis in what scientists call the Great Oxidation Event. Roughly 2.4 billion years ago, this was one of the most dramatic chemical transformations in Earth's history. Oxygen is a corrosive, reactive gas. Before photosynthetic bacteria began producing it in massive quantities, it barely existed in the atmosphere. Its accumulation was catastrophic for the anaerobic organisms that had dominated the planet for over 1 billion years. Most of them were driven into ecological margins, confined to deep ocean sediments and oxygen-free environments where their descendants survive today. Oxygen-producing bacteria literally poisoned their own world and remade it in their image. They were spectacularly successful at being simple, and for 2 billion years they stayed that way. No eyes, no limbs, no brains. Just bacteria, everywhere, doing nothing but dividing and eating and dying for an expanse of time so vast it dwarfs the entire history of complex life that followed. Then something happened that has never happened again. A single prokaryotic cell, most likely an archaeon, engulfed another prokaryote, probably a bacterium capable of using oxygen to generate energy. Instead of digesting its prey, the host cell kept it alive. The captured bacterium continued to function inside its host, generating energy through aerobic respiration and sharing the products. Over millions of years, this partnership became permanent. The engulfed bacterium lost its independence, surrendering most of its genes to the host cell's genome while retaining just enough to maintain its own essential functions. It became what we now call a mitochondrion, and the cell that housed it became the ancestor of every eukaryote that has ever existed. Every plant, every animal, every fungus, every alga, every protozoan, every complex organism on this planet descends from that single event. The significance of this transition cannot be overstated. Prokaryotic cells face a fundamental energy limitation. Their genomes are small because they generate energy across their outer membrane, and the ratio of membrane surface area to cell volume constrains how much energy they can produce relative to their genetic complexity. They are trapped in an energy straitjacket. To grow larger or more genetically complex, a prokaryote would need more energy, but producing more energy would require more membrane, which would require a larger cell, which would increase the volume faster than the surface area, which would reduce the energy available per gene. It is a trap with no exit. Mitochondria shattered that constraint. By internalizing energy production inside dedicated compartments, each one descended from that original captured bacterium. Eukaryotic cells could support genomes thousands of times larger than any prokaryote. This unlocked a universe of biological possibility. Gene regulation, cell differentiation, multicellularity, tissues, organs, nervous systems, brains. None of it was possible without the energy surplus provided by mitochondria, and mitochondria arose exactly once. This is the critical point. Endosymbiosis itself is not rare. Bacteria live inside other organisms throughout the tree of life. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria inhabit the root nodules of legumes. Photosynthetic algae live inside coral cells. Bacterial endosymbionts provide essential nutrients to roughly 10 to 15% of all insect species. Endosymbiosis happens, but the specific type of endosymbiosis that created eukaryotes, in which a prokaryotic host permanently integrated another free-living prokaryote into its cellular machinery so deeply that neither could survive without the other, appears to have happened only once in roughly 4 billion years of biological history. A 2023 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences built metabolic models to explore why prokaryote to prokaryote endosymbiosis is so extraordinarily rare. The researchers found that the metabolic compatibility required for one free-living prokaryote to survive inside another, let alone become permanently integrated, represents a vanishingly narrow window of biochemical conditions. Most combinations simply cannot work. The cells are metabolically incompatible. They compete for the same resources or produce waste products toxic to each other. The fusion that gave rise to all complex life required a specific pairing of metabolic capabilities that was, in the words of the researchers, extremely unlikely. A 2025 review in the journal Bioessays traced the transition from the first eukaryotic common ancestor to the last eukaryotic common ancestor, and described it as a difficult population bottleneck. The absence of any surviving intermediate forms, any partially eukaryotic organisms frozen in evolutionary transition, suggests that the process, once started, happened rapidly and under intense selective pressure. The few cells that managed the transition dominated their ecological niches so completely that no alternative path to complexity ever gained a foothold. There is only one known parallel. A photosynthetic amoeba called Paulinella independently acquired a cyanobacterium as an internal partner roughly 120 million years ago. But Paulinella accomplished this as a fully formed eukaryote, not as a prokaryote. The original transition, the one that created eukaryotes in the first place, has no parallels anywhere in the history of life. It was a one-time event that locked in the future of all complex life on Earth. If eukaryogenesis is the great filter, the implications are staggering. It would mean that simple microbial life might be relatively common in the universe. Bacteria could exist on billions of worlds. But complex life, anything more sophisticated than a single-celled microbe, would be almost non-existent. The galaxy could be full of living planets, and virtually all of them would be worlds of slime, microbial oceans under ice moons, bacterial mats on rocky shores, entire biospheres that never produce so much as a visible organism, let alone an eye or a brain. For 2 billion years, that was Earth. Our planet was alive, but it was not interesting. It would have shown biosignatures in its atmosphere, oxygen and methane coexisting in chemical disequilibrium, but no observer in a distant star system could have detected intelligence here. There was none. There was only bacteria. And without that singular, improbable fusion event, bacteria is all there would ever have been. Even after the eukaryotic revolution, the road to complexity was not guaranteed. Eukaryotic cells existed for roughly another billion years before anything resembling multicellular life appeared in the fossil record. Scientists sometimes call this interval the boring billion, and the name conceals just how strange and informative this period really is. For a billion years, from roughly 1.8 billion years ago to roughly 800 million years ago, the planet seemed to stall. Eukaryotes existed. They had mitochondria. They had the energy capacity for complexity, and yet nothing complex emerged. The fossil record shows essentially the same simple organisms persisting, unchanging, across a span of time longer than the entire history of complex animal life that followed. The reason appears to be geochemical. After the Great Oxidation event flooded the atmosphere with oxygen, you might expect oxygen levels to keep rising, steadily creating the conditions for more complex, energy-hungry organisms. That is not what happened. Oxygen levels rose, then stabilized at a frustrating intermediate concentration, too high to allow the reducing chemistry that had driven earlier metabolic innovations, but too low to support the sustained aerobic metabolism that complex multicellular animals would eventually require. The oceans during this period were stratified, with oxygenated surface waters sitting above deep waters that remained largely anoxic and rich in dissolved iron and sulfur. These deep anoxic layers acted as chemical sinks, absorbing free oxygen before it could accumulate further. The planet was caught in a geochemical trap. Oxygen production continued, but oxygen was being consumed as fast as it was made. The climate cooperated with this stagnation. The boring billion was one of the most climatically stable periods in Earth's history. There were no significant glaciations, no major volcanic upheavals, no dramatic shifts in ocean chemistry. Stability sounds like it should be good for life, but evolution is driven by change. Without environmental disruption, there is less pressure to adapt. Without adaptation pressure, innovation slows. The boring billion was a world where conditions were good enough for simple eukaryotes to thrive, but not challenging enough to push them toward anything more elaborate. Life was comfortable and stuck. Breaking out of this billion-year rut required a specific geochemical trigger. Roughly 800 million years ago, a second major rise in atmospheric oxygen began, an event scientists call the Neoproterozoic oxygenation event. The causes are debated, but likely involved tectonic changes that exposed new rock to weathering, burying organic carbon and allowing oxygen to accumulate, and the evolution of more efficient photosynthetic organisms. Oxygen levels roughly doubled or tripled over a geologically brief period. This surge provided the energy budget that complex, energy-hungry multicellular organisms needed to function. Within 200 million years of this oxygen rise, the first large multicellular animals appeared in the Ediacaran fossil record. The timing is almost certainly not coincidental. Complex life waited a billion years for the planet's chemistry to cooperate. On another world, that chemistry might never have cooperated. The boring billion might have lasted forever. Simple forms of multicellularity, colonies of cells loosely sticking together, seem to have evolved independently several times across different lineages. But complex multicellularity, where cells differentiate into specialized types and coordinate their behavior to form tissues and organs, appears to have evolved far fewer times. Plants, animals, fungi, and a small number of algal lineages achieved it. Billions of other eukaryotic lineages did not. They remained single-celled. They are still single-celled today. The first large, complex, multicellular organisms appeared during the Ediacaran period, roughly 600 million years ago. These were strange, soft-bodied creatures that left faint impressions in ancient seafloor sediments. Many of them have no obvious modern descendants. They look like nothing alive today, quilted fronds and disc-shaped organisms and fractal branching forms that paleontologists struggle to classify. They lasted roughly 60 million years. Then something extraordinary happened. In the span of perhaps 20 to 25 million years, beginning around 540 million years ago, the fossil record explodes with diversity. Hard shells, eyes, jaws, limbs, predators and prey locked in evolutionary arms races. This is the Cambrian explosion, the most dramatic burst of biological innovation in Earth's history. Nearly every major animal body plan that exists today, from arthropods to chordates, first appears in Cambrian rocks. The speed of this diversification remains one of the great puzzles in evolutionary biology, but what the Cambrian explosion gave, mass extinction nearly took away. 5 times in the past 540 million years, the majority of species on Earth have been wiped out in catastrophic events. Each one came close to erasing the progress of hundreds of millions of years of evolution in a geological instant. The worst was the Permian extinction, approximately 252 million years ago. To understand what nearly happened, you have to understand the scale. The continents at that time were fused into a single supercontinent called Pangaea. Massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia, known as the Siberian Traps, poured lava across an area the size of Western Europe. But the lava was not the primary killer. The eruptions released staggering quantities of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, triggering runaway greenhouse warming. Ocean temperatures rose by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. The warming destabilized methane hydrates locked in ocean sediments, releasing additional greenhouse gases in a feedback loop that accelerated the heating further. Ocean circulation slowed. Dissolved oxygen levels plummeted. Vast swaths of the ocean became anoxic dead zones where virtually nothing could survive. Acid rain stripped nutrients from terrestrial soils. On land, forests died. In the ocean, reef ecosystems collapsed entirely. When it was over, roughly 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species were extinct. It came so close to sterilizing the planet that paleontologists call it the Great Dying. Recovery took roughly 10 million years. For the first several million years after the extinction, the fossil record shows a desolate world dominated by a handful of hardy survivor species, disaster taxa that thrived in the absence of competition. Complex ecosystems had to be rebuilt almost from scratch. Had the Permian extinction been slightly worse, just a few percentage points more severe, complex life on Earth might never have recovered. The handful of lineages that survived and eventually gave rise to dinosaurs, mammals, and ultimately humans would have been erased along with everything else. Evolution would have had to start over from whatever simple organisms remained, if any. The clock would have reset, and the 4 billion years of accumulated biological progress that preceded the extinction would have been permanently lost. This is not speculation. It is a direct consequence of how close the extinction came to totality. The margin between Earth's actual history and a permanent return to microbial simplicity was razor thin. 66 million years ago, another roll of the dice. An asteroid roughly 10 kilometers across struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater and triggering the Cretaceous extinction that ended the age of dinosaurs. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear weapons. Tsunamis swept across entire ocean basins. Wildfires ignited across continents. Dust and soot blocked sunlight for months, collapsing photosynthesis and plunging the planet into an impact winter. Roughly 75% of all species went extinct. The dinosaurs, which had dominated terrestrial ecosystems for over 160 million years, were eliminated almost entirely. Only one lineage survived, the ancestors of modern birds. But this extinction had an ironic consequence. It cleared the ecological space that allowed mammals to diversify. Before the asteroid, mammals had been small, mostly nocturnal creatures living in the margins of a dinosaur-dominated world. The largest mammals were roughly the size of a badger. After the dinosaurs vanished, mammals exploded into every available niche. Within 10 million years, they had produced whales, bats, primates, horses, and the ancestors of every major mammalian order alive today. Without that specific asteroid hitting that specific location At that specific angle, with that specific energy, the age of mammals might never have begun. Dinosaurs might have continued to dominate for another 100 million years or more, and the particular lineage of primates that eventually produced Homo sapiens would never have existed. Each of these events represents a moment when the progress of complexity on this planet nearly reset to zero. Evolution does not have a direction. It does not aim toward intelligence. It responds to immediate environmental pressures through variation and selection. The fact that one lineage of mammals eventually produced a species capable of building radio telescopes is not the fulfillment of a cosmic plan. It is a contingent accident, dependent on every one of these mass extinctions happening at exactly the severity they did, killing enough to open ecological niches for new forms, but not so much as to erase the potential for future complexity entirely. And then there is intelligence itself. This may be the most sobering filter candidate of all. Life has existed on Earth for roughly 3.5 billion years. In that time, evolution has produced an almost incomprehensible variety of forms. Millions of species have come and gone. Complex nervous systems evolved independently in multiple lineages. Octopuses, crows, dolphins, and great apes all demonstrate sophisticated cognitive abilities. Tool use has been documented in birds, primates, and even some fish. Problem-solving, social learning, and communication exist across dozens of evolutionary lineages. Crows can solve multi-step puzzles. Octopuses can open jars, navigate mazes, and recognize individual human faces. Dolphins have signature whistles that function as names. Elephants mourn their dead. The raw ingredients for intelligence are scattered across the animal kingdom. But technology, the ability to manipulate the environment at a scale that could become visible from another star, has arisen exactly once. One species, one lineage, one planet. In 3.5 billion years. Out of every organism that has ever lived, estimated at over 5 billion distinct species across Earth's history, only Homo sapiens has developed language complex enough to encode abstract knowledge, hands dexterous enough to build machines, and social structures organized enough to sustain cumulative technological progress. The reason becomes clear when you examine the most intelligent non-human species and ask why they never built anything. Consider dolphins. Their brains are large, complex, and richly folded. They demonstrate self-awareness, pass the mirror test, use tools in rudimentary ways, and communicate through sophisticated vocal systems that researchers are still attempting to decode. By many cognitive measures, dolphins are among the most intelligent animals on Earth. But they live in the ocean. They have no hands. They have no way to grasp, shape, or assemble materials. They cannot make fire. You cannot smelt metal underwater. You cannot build a forge beneath the waves. Even if a dolphin possessed the cognitive ability of a human engineer, the physics of its environment would prevent it from ever constructing a single tool more complex than a sponge held against its nose to protect it while foraging on the seafloor. Intelligence without manipulation is intelligence trapped. The ocean is a prison for technological development, and dolphins are its inmates, no matter how brilliant they become. Octopuses present a different and in some ways more disturbing case. They are arguably the most intelligent invertebrates on Earth. They solve complex puzzles, escape from sealed containers, use coconut shells as portable shelters, and display what appears to be playful curiosity. Their cognitive abilities evolved entirely independently from vertebrate intelligence, along a lineage that diverged from ours over 500 million years ago. If there were ever a case for convergent evolution, producing something approaching technological intelligence in a second lineage, the octopus would be the strongest candidate. But octopuses are solitary. They do not form social groups. They do not cooperate on tasks. Most critically, they die shortly after reproducing. A female octopus guards her eggs until they hatch, refusing to eat during the entire brooding period, and then dies of starvation. There is no overlap between parent and offspring, no period of teaching, no transfer of learned behavior from one generation to the next. Every octopus that has ever lived has started from zero, with no inherited knowledge, no cultural memory, no accumulated wisdom from its predecessors. Even if individual octopuses were as cognitively capable as individual humans, they could never build a civilization because they have no mechanism for cumulative progress. Each generation reinvents the wheel and then vanishes before it can pass the invention on. Crows and their corvid relatives represent yet another path to intelligence that dead ends short of technology. New Caledonian crows manufacture tools from leaves and twigs, shaping them into hooks and probes to extract insects from crevices. They pass these tool designs between individuals through social learning, one of the few documented cases of cultural transmission outside primates. They solve multi-step causal reasoning tasks that stump some great apes. Their intelligence is genuine and impressive, but their bodies are built for flight, not construction. Their feet can grip a branch or hold a twig, but they cannot perform the fine motor manipulations that human hands are capable of. They lack the body mass to exert significant force on materials, and they live in small, dispersed social groups without the population density or cooperative infrastructure needed to sustain the kind of division of labor that technology requires. Crows are brilliant. They will never build a radio telescope. Each of these cases reveals the same lesson. Intelligence is necessary for technology, but not sufficient. Technology requires a specific and unlikely combination of traits that evolution does not reliably produce together. A large, complex brain, manipulative appendages capable of fine motor control, a social structure that supports cooperation, specialization, and teaching, a terrestrial environment where fire, metallurgy, and construction are physically possible, a lifespan long enough for extended learning, and a reproductive strategy that creates overlap between generations so that knowledge can accumulate rather than being lost with each death. Humans possess all of these traits simultaneously. No other species in the history of Earth has come close. Evolution produces intelligence in many forms. It does not produce civilizations. Our own genus, Homo, has existed for roughly 2.5 million years. For most of that time, our ancestors made stone tools that barely changed from one millennium to the next. Homo erectus used essentially the same hand axe design for over 1 million years, 1 million years of stasis. Intelligence of the kind that builds civilizations did not emerge gradually and inevitably from the primate lineage. It appeared in a burst with Homo sapiens, roughly 300,000 years ago, and even then, it took another 270,000 years before that intelligence produced anything resembling permanent settlements, writing, or technology. The gap between cognitive capacity and technological civilization is enormous. Having a big brain is not enough. You need the right body, the right environment, the right social structure, and an unbroken chain of cultural transmission that allows knowledge to accumulate across generations rather than being lost with each death. And even that chain nearly broke. Roughly 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano in what is now Indonesia erupted with a force that dwarfed any volcanic event in recorded human history. It ejected roughly 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere, blanketing South and Southeast Asia in ash and triggering a volcanic winter that may have lasted a decade or more. Global temperatures dropped sharply. Vegetation died. Food sources collapsed. Genetic evidence suggests that the human population crashed during this period to as few as a few thousand breeding individuals, possibly fewer than 10,000 people on the entire planet. Some geneticists have argued that the bottleneck was even more severe, with the effective breeding population dropping to roughly 1,000. The evidence for the severity of this bottleneck is debated. Not all geneticists agree that Toba was the sole cause, but the genetic signature of a severe population contraction during this period is widely accepted. Humanity nearly went extinct. Not from an asteroid, not from a mass extinction event on the Permian scale, from a volcano. One eruption on one island in one decade came close to eliminating the only species on this planet that had any chance of ever developing technology. If Toba had been slightly larger, or if the human populations that survived had been slightly smaller or less geographically dispersed, the chain of cultural transmission would have snapped. The accumulated knowledge of 300,000 years of Homo sapiens existence would have been lost, and the planet would have continued spinning, teeming with life, rich with complexity but forever silent. Because the one species that could have spoken to the stars was gone. This means intelligence is not a convergent solution to a universal problem. It is a specific, contingent outcome that depends on a precise chain of unlikely events. The right kind of body plan, the right kind of social structure, the right environmental pressures at the right time. Remove any link in that chain, change the angle of the Chicxulub impact by a few degrees, make the Permian extinction 5% more severe, prevent the particular endosymbiotic event that created mitochondria, let Toba erupt with 10% more force, and technological civilization never appears on Earth. Not in 3.5 billion years, not in 35 billion years, not ever. Each of these transitions, abiogenesis, eukaryogenesis, complex multicellularity, intelligence, represents a potential great filter in its own right. Any one of them might be so improbable across the universe that it alone explains the silence. Or perhaps the filter is not a single step, but a combination, a gauntlet of improbable transitions that must all succeed in sequence on the same world. The probability of passing through one filter might be low. The probability of passing through all of them might be astronomically lower. If this interpretation is correct, it carries a message that is paradoxically reassuring. If the hardest steps are behind us, then humanity has already beaten the longest odds in the universe. The silence of the cosmos is not a threat. It is the sound of a race that almost nobody finishes, and we are among the vanishingly few who crossed the finish line. We should expect to find the galaxy empty, because getting here required a chain of near miracles stretching back 4 billion years. Every bacterium on every warm ocean world, in every habitable zone, around every sun-like star, represents a runner who will never complete the course. We already did. But this comforting conclusion rests on an assumption. It assumes that biology is where the hard part lives. It assumes that once a civilization develops technology, the rest of the journey, survival, expansion, visibility, follows naturally. And there is a very different body of evidence, drawn not from paleontology or molecular biology, but from history, game theory, and the physics of self-destruction, that suggests the assumption might be fatally wrong. Because there is another class of filter that does not care how improbable your origin was. It does not care how many bottlenecks you survived. It waits at the other end of the chain, patient and indifferent, and it activates precisely at the moment when a civilization becomes powerful enough to be noticed. There is a version of the great filter that does not care how rare your origin was. It does not care how many biological bottlenecks you survived, how many mass extinctions you weathered, how many billions of years of evolution it took to produce your first curious mind. This version of the filter sits at the end of the chain, not the beginning. It waits for a civilization to become powerful, and then it tests whether that civilization can survive its own power. If it cannot, the filter closes. The species vanishes. The planet goes quiet, and another star system joins the silence. This is the ahead filter, and it is terrifying precisely because it matches a pattern we can already observe on our own world. Consider the timeline. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. For almost all of that history, we lacked the ability to do anything that would register on a cosmic scale. We hunted, we gathered, we painted on cave walls and told stories around fires. We could not have destroyed ourselves if we had tried. Our weapons were stones and spears. Our reach was local. Our impact on the biosphere was modest. Then, in a span of time so short it barely registers on the evolutionary clock, everything changed. In 1945, humanity detonated the first nuclear weapon. In the 81 years since, we have built roughly 12,500 nuclear warheads, distributed across 9 nations, mounted on missiles that can reach any point on the planet within 30 minutes. The combined explosive yield of the current global arsenal is sufficient to destroy every major city on Earth several times over. A full-scale nuclear exchange between major powers would kill hundreds of millions of people in the initial blasts and firestorms. But the true devastation would follow in the weeks and months after. Soot from burning cities would rise into the stratosphere and spread around the globe, blocking sunlight and triggering a nuclear winter that could drop global temperatures by 10 to 20 degrees Celsius. Agriculture would collapse. Ecosystems would unravel. The resulting famine could kill billions. The civilization that launched the missiles would not survive to regret the decision. This is not speculation. These projections come from detailed climate models that have been refined over decades. The nuclear winter hypothesis was first rigorously studied in the 1980s. and has been revisited with modern computational tools that broadly confirm the original conclusions. The extinction of humanity from a full-scale nuclear war is not guaranteed. Small populations in remote areas might survive, but the destruction of technological civilization almost certainly is. The infrastructure, institutions, supply chains, and accumulated knowledge that define modern society would not recover on any timescale relevant to cosmic visibility. A post-nuclear Earth would go dark, its radio emissions would cease, its atmospheric chemistry would change. Within a few centuries, the planet would be indistinguishable from one that had never produced an intelligent species at all. What makes this threat relevant to the Great Filter is not just that it exists, it is how close it has already come to happening. The history of the nuclear age is littered with moments where the destruction of civilization was averted not by wisdom or design, but by luck and the conscience of individual human beings who happened to be in the right place at the right time. In October 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine designated B-59 was operating in the Caribbean, cut off from communication with Moscow and under depth-charge bombardment from American destroyers. The submarine's captain, convinced that nuclear war had already begun on the surface, ordered the launch of a nuclear torpedo against the American fleet. Soviet protocol required the agreement of 3 senior officers for a nuclear launch. 2 of the 3 agreed. The third, a man named Vasily Arkhipov, refused. He argued that the situation was uncertain, that they should surface and assess conditions before firing. The order was not carried out. The submarine surfaced. The world continued. One man's judgment, under unimaginable pressure, in the dark interior of a steel tube hundreds of feet below the ocean surface, was all that stood between the world as it exists today and a nuclear exchange that could have killed hundreds of millions of people within hours. 21 years later, in September 1983, a Soviet early warning satellite reported that the United States had launched 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles at the Soviet Union. Soviet protocol called for an immediate retaliatory strike. The officer on duty, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, looked at the data and made a decision that contradicted every procedure he had been trained to follow. He judged it was a false alarm. He did not report it up the chain of command as a confirmed launch. He was right. The satellite had misidentified sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds as missile exhaust plumes. Had Petrov followed his training, had he reported the detection as genuine, the Soviet leadership might have ordered a retaliatory launch against American cities within minutes. The American response would have followed within minutes of that, and the world would have burned. Petrov later said that his decision was based partly on analysis and partly on a feeling in his gut. The survival of human civilization rested on one man's gut feeling on one night in September. These are not outliers. Historians have documented over a dozen incidents during the Cold War where miscommunication, technical malfunction, or miscalculation brought the world to the brink of nuclear conflict. During the Able Archer military exercise in November 1983, just 2 months after the Petrov incident, NATO conducted a realistic simulation of nuclear launch procedures. Soviet intelligence interpreted it as preparation for an actual first strike and placed their nuclear forces on high alert. The crisis dissipated only because several Soviet officials concluded independently that a genuine attack would not be preceded by an exercise this transparent. In 1995, Russian early warning systems detected a Norwegian scientific rocket launched to study the Northern Lights, and initially classified it as a potential American submarine-launched ballistic missile. Russian President Boris Yeltsin was briefed, and the nuclear briefcase was activated. The situation was resolved within minutes, but for a brief period, the decision to launch rested on the rapid assessment of a few individuals interpreting ambiguous data under time pressure. The pattern is clear. Nuclear weapons create a permanent background risk of civilizational annihilation. The risk is not theoretical. It has been tested repeatedly, and civilization has survived each test not through robust institutional safeguards, but through what can only be described as good fortune. A species that relies on luck for its continued existence is a species that the Great Filter can catch. And nuclear weapons are only the first entry on the list. Climate change represents a slower, but potentially equally devastating filter. The physics is straightforward. Burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that trap heat in the atmosphere. The planet warms, ice sheets melt, sea levels rise, weather patterns destabilize. Ecosystems that took millions of years to develop collapse in decades. The pace of warming currently underway has no precedent in at least the last 800,000 years of ice core records, and possibly much longer. A 2025 framework from the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk at the University of Cambridge described how climate hazards interact with the vulnerabilities of interconnected global systems to produce cascading, catastrophic outcomes. The danger is not simply that temperatures rise. The danger is that rising temperatures trigger feedback loops, thawing permafrost releasing methane, shrinking ice cover reducing the planet's reflectivity, dying forests releasing stored carbon, that accelerate the warming beyond any possibility of human intervention. If those feedbacks engage fully, the Earth could enter a hothouse state that persists for millennia and renders large portions of the surface uninhabitable. Would this destroy civilization entirely? Perhaps not. Humans are adaptable. Pockets of habitable territory would remain, particularly at higher latitudes. But the collapse of agricultural systems, the displacement of billions of people from coastal and equatorial regions, the breakdown of international trade and cooperation under cascading resource pressures, these could reduce a global technological civilization to isolated survival communities within a few generations. The species might persist. The civilization would not, and from the perspective of the Great Filter, the distinction does not matter. What matters is whether the civilization remains visible, whether it continues to develop, whether it ever reaches the point of spreading beyond its home world. A species that retreats into survival mode on a damaged planet has been effectively filtered. What makes this especially relevant to the Great Filter is something that none of these individual threats fully convey on their own. Technological civilizations may be inherently fragile in ways their inhabitants do not recognize until it is too late. Modern human civilization is not a robust, redundant system designed to withstand catastrophic disruption. It is a tightly coupled, globally interdependent machine in which the failure of one critical component can cascade into the failure of many others. Our food supply depends on a handful of crop species, grown with synthetic fertilizers derived from natural gas, harvested with petroleum-powered machinery, and distributed through international shipping networks that rely on satellite navigation, digital payment systems, and political stability in dozens of countries simultaneously. Remove any link in that chain, and the system does not degrade gracefully. It fractures. Our knowledge base is increasingly digital. The accumulated scientific, medical, engineering, and cultural knowledge of human civilization is stored on servers, in cloud infrastructure, in formats that require functioning electricity, functioning hardware, and functioning software to access. If the electrical grid fails permanently across a large enough area, most of that knowledge becomes inaccessible within a generation. The people who know how to rebuild the grid need the grid to access the information that tells them how to rebuild it. Libraries burned once in Alexandria. Today, the equivalent would not be a fire. It would be a prolonged loss of the infrastructure that powers the machines that store everything we know. The knowledge would not be destroyed. It would simply become unreadable, locked inside dead servers in dark rooms, as useless as cuneiform tablets to a civilization that has lost the ability to decode them. This fragility means that the individual threats discussed earlier, nuclear war, climate collapse, engineered pandemics, artificial intelligence, misalignment, do not need to destroy civilization directly. They only need to knock out one critical system hard enough and long enough for the cascading failures to do the rest. A severe pandemic does not need to kill everyone. It needs to disrupt supply chains long enough for food distribution to collapse in densely populated regions. A cyber attack does not need to destroy data. It needs to disable the financial systems that coordinate economic activity long enough for trust to evaporate. A solar storm of sufficient magnitude, which has a roughly 12% chance of occurring in any given decade according to some estimates, could disable satellite communications and damage electrical transformers across an entire hemisphere. The 2012 Carrington-class solar storm missed Earth by approximately 9 days. If it had arrived a week earlier, the damage to global electrical infrastructure could have taken years to repair. Technological civilizations are glass cannons. They are enormously powerful and enormously brittle. They can reshape their planet and broadcast their presence across light years of space, but they can also be brought down by disruptions that would barely register on the geological timescale. A century of darkness is nothing to a planet. It is everything to a civilization. Then, there is artificial intelligence. This is the newest and in some ways most unsettling entry on the existential risk register, because it involves a category of danger that has no historical precedent. Every previous technology humans developed, fire, metallurgy, gunpowder, nuclear energy, was a tool that amplified human capabilities but remained under human control. A hammer does not decide what to hit. A nuclear reactor does not choose when to melt down. Artificial intelligence is different. It is the first technology with the potential to become an independent agent, pursuing goals that may not align with human survival or well-being. In 2026, a study confirmed a potentially habitable super-Earth orbiting the star GJ 887, just 10.7 light-years from our solar system. It was only the second known habitable zone planet within 10 light-years of Earth. The concern is not that machines will become angry or malicious. The concern is far more subtle and far more difficult to solve. A sufficiently advanced artificial intelligence system, given a goal and the autonomy to pursue it, might identify strategies that are highly effective at achieving the goal while being catastrophic for the humans who created it. Not because the system hates humanity, but because humanity's survival was never specified as a constraint. Consider a simple example that researchers in the field often cite. An AI system tasked with maximizing the production of paperclips, given sufficient capability and autonomy, might eventually convert all available matter, including human beings, into paperclips or paperclip manufacturing infrastructure, not out of malice, but because that is the optimal strategy for achieving the stated goal. The example sounds absurd, but the underlying logic is sound. Any sufficiently powerful optimizer, pursuing any goal that does not explicitly include the preservation of human life as a terminal value, will by default treat human life as a resource to be used or an obstacle to be removed if doing so improves performance. This is not a distant hypothetical. The pace of development in artificial intelligence through the 2020s has been extraordinary, outstripping the predictions of most researchers in the field. Systems that were considered impossible 5 years ago are now routine. The question of whether artificial intelligence poses an existential risk to humanity is actively debated among leading researchers. Some, like those behind the 2025 publication, "If anyone builds it, everyone dies," argue that superintelligent systems will almost certainly emerge within the coming decades, and that misalignment between their goals and human interests is the default outcome, requiring extraordinary effort to prevent. Others push back forcefully, arguing that current systems remain narrow, statistical pattern-matching tools with no genuine autonomy, strategic awareness, or capacity for recursive self-improvement. A 2025 review from a researcher at the University of Tunis examined the empirical record and found that none of the phenomena required for the catastrophic scenario, sustained recursive self-improvement, autonomous strategic awareness, or intractable lethal misalignment, have been observed in any existing system. As of 2026, the debate is unresolved, but even skeptics of the most extreme scenarios acknowledge that advanced AI systems deployed without adequate safeguards could cause severe harm, destabilizing economies, enabling unprecedented surveillance, automating warfare, and concentrating power in ways that undermine the institutional structures civilizations depend on for long-term stability. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which maintains the doomsday clock as a symbolic measure of existential risk, has included artificial intelligence alongside nuclear weapons and climate change as a contributing factor in their assessment. Engineered pandemics represent yet another filter candidate. The same biotechnology that allows scientists to develop vaccines and gene therapies also enables the deliberate creation of pathogens more dangerous than anything nature has produced. Advances in gene synthesis, CRISPR editing, and computational biology have lowered the barriers to creating novel biological agents. A sufficiently virulent engineered pathogen, designed for high transmissibility and delayed symptom onset, could spread globally before public health systems even detect it. And quote, Natural pandemics have devastated civilizations throughout history. The Black Death killed roughly a third of Europe's population in the 1300s. The 1918 influenza pandemic killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide. An engineered pandemic, optimized by intelligent design rather than blind evolution, could be categorically worse. Unlike nuclear weapons, which require enormous industrial infrastructure, the tools of synthetic biology are becoming smaller, cheaper, and more widely accessible every year. The barrier to entry is falling at the same time the potential for harm is rising. Each of these threats operates on a different timescale. Nuclear war could unfold in hours. An engineered pandemic could unfold in months. Climate collapse unfolds over decades. Artificial intelligence misalignment might emerge over years or arrive in a sudden capability jump, but they share a common structural feature that makes them relevant to the Great Filter. They all arise from the same source: technology. The very tool that makes a civilization capable of becoming visible, of broadcasting signals and building megastructures and reaching other stars, is the same tool that gives it the power to destroy itself. This is not a coincidence. It is a consequence of how capability scales. A species that can split the atom can also vaporize a city. A species that can engineer genomes can also engineer plagues. A species that can build intelligence can also lose control of it. Power and peril grow together. They cannot be separated. In 2021, a study published in the journal Galaxies modeled the evolution of intelligent life across the Milky Way. The researchers, led by Shang Tsai and Jonathan Jiang, simulated a galaxy populated by civilizations that arise, develop technology, and either survive or destroy themselves. They varied the key parameters: the rate of abiogenesis, the fraction of habitable planets that develop intelligence, the average lifetime of a technological civilization, and the probability of self-annihilation. The results were striking. Of all the parameters in the model, the probability of self-annihilation was the single most influential variable in determining how much intelligent life the galaxy contains at any given time. Even small increases in the self-destruction rate dramatically reduced the population of detectable civilizations. The simulation also suggested that most intelligent life in the Milky Way, if it exists, is likely young, because older civilizations have had more time to encounter existential risks and be eliminated by them. The peak of potential extraterrestrial intelligence in their model sat roughly 4 kiloparsecs from the galactic center, around 8 billion years into galactic history. We are younger than that peak, and we are surrounded by silence. A 2025 preprint by Robin Corbet, published as A Less Terrifying Universe, Mundanity, as an explanation for the Fermi paradox, introduced a related but distinct idea. Corbett argued that extraterrestrial civilizations, if they exist, may be far more ordinary than popular imagination supposes. They may not build Dyson spheres or launch fleets of self-replicating probes. They may not colonize entire galaxies. They may develop modest, local technologies, use them sustainably, and persist for long periods without ever becoming visible at interstellar distances. In this scenario, the filter is not necessarily destruction. It is limitation. Civilizations reach a certain level of technological capability and then plateau, not because they are destroyed, but because the incentives and costs of expansion beyond their home system are too great. They settle into equilibrium. They become comfortable. They stop reaching outward. This does not eliminate the Great Filter. It redefines it. The filter is not extinction. It is obscurity. A 2025 study by Michael Garrett, published in Acta Astronautica, introduced another mechanism that could produce the same silence through an entirely different pathway. Garrett built a mathematical model showing that the phase during which an alien civilization uses detectable radio technology might be vanishingly brief. Think about how quickly humanity has moved from its first radio transmissions to digital communications that are far harder to detect at interstellar distances. Early radio and television broadcasts were powerful, omnidirectional, and loud. Modern communications increasingly use fiber optics, tightly beamed satellite links, and low-power digital protocols that leak almost no signal into space. In roughly a century, we went from being a radio-bright civilization to one that is rapidly going radio-dark. Garrett's model suggested that this transition might be universal. A civilization develops radio technology. broadcasts loudly for a few decades, and then advances into communication methods that are effectively invisible from the outside. The detectable radio window might last only 30 to 50 years out of a civilization's entire lifespan. If you imagine thousands of civilizations scattered across the galaxy, each one flickering into radio visibility for a few decades out of millions of years of existence, the probability that any two of them happen to be listening during each other's brief window becomes astronomically small. We are not searching for civilizations. We are searching for a specific fleeting moment in a civilization's development, and we are hoping that moment happens to coincide with our own. The silence might not mean they are dead. It might mean we are looking for a match being struck in the dark and we blinked at the wrong moment. A 2026 preprint, published in MNRAS, introduced yet another candidate filter, one that operates on an entirely different mechanism than any of the threats discussed above. Researcher Darren Duggan proposed that depopulation itself, declining birth rates driven by the same evolutionary and social forces that produce intelligence, may be a universal filter. The argument runs as follows. As a species advances and reaches the top of its food chain, natural selection favors reduced reproduction. Fewer offspring per individual is advantageous when infant mortality is low and resource competition is high. As the species develops intelligence and technology, this trend accelerates. Urbanization concentrates populations in environments where raising children is expensive and socially optional. The result is a demographic curve that peaks and then declines. On Earth, this pattern is not theoretical. It is already happening. The global fertility rate has fallen from roughly 5 children per woman in the 1960s to approximately 2.3 today. The replacement threshold, the number needed to maintain a stable population, is 2.1. Dozens of countries have already fallen below that line. South Korea's fertility rate sits below 1, the lowest ever recorded for a large nation. Japan, Italy, Spain, Germany, China, and much of Eastern Europe sit well below replacement. The demographic transition, as researchers call it, is one of the most robust empirical patterns in social science. As nations develop economically, as women gain access to education and contraception, as societies urbanize and the cost of raising children rises, birth rates fall. The correlation is so consistent across cultures, continents, religions, and political systems that demographers treat it as nearly deterministic. It does not require coercion or policy. It arises naturally from the conditions that technological development creates. Dugan's paper argues that if this pattern is universal, if every intelligent species that develops technology also develops the social and biological conditions that suppress reproduction, then advanced civilizations may simply shrink and vanish over centuries, not through catastrophe but through quiet demographic collapse. The paper models this decline and suggests that population collapse to non-viable levels could occur in less than 500 years after a species reaches peak population, a span far too short to establish interstellar colonies or become visible at galactic distances. This is a filter that does not look like a filter. It carries no drama, no explosions, no apocalyptic imagery. It is the slow dimming of a species that simply stops replacing itself. A civilization that does not reproduce does not need to be destroyed by war or plague or environmental collapse. It just fades, its cities empty, its institutions thin, its knowledge erodes as the population that carries it contracts. Eventually, the lights go out, not with a bang, but with an absence, and it is consistent with the observed silence. A civilization that takes 500 years to decline from its technological peak to a remnant population would never become visible at interstellar distances. It would rise, shine briefly, and fade, leaving no trace. But the most disturbing implication of the ahead filter does not involve any specific risk. It involves the relationship between what we find elsewhere and what it means for us. This requires understanding a piece of logic that sounds simple but carries devastating emotional weight. If the great filter exists and is responsible for the silence of the cosmos, then its total difficulty must be enormous. The combined improbability of passing through all the steps from dead chemistry to visible civilization must be so extreme that it accounts for 2 trillion silent galaxies. That total difficulty is distributed somewhere across the chain of steps. Some of it may sit in the past, some of it may sit in the future. We do not know the distribution, but we can constrain it based on evidence. Every time we discover that one of the past steps was easier than we thought, the remaining difficulty must be redistributed forward. If abiogenesis turns out to be relatively common, that particular step is not the filter, and the filter must be somewhere else. If complex cells arise readily on worlds with the right chemistry, that step is not the filter either. With each past step removed from consideration, the probability increases that the filter lies ahead. This is why the search for extraterrestrial life is not merely a curiosity. It is a test of our future, and the result cuts both ways. If we search Mars, Europa, and Enceladus and find nothing, that is oddly reassuring. It suggests that even the earliest steps of biology are genuinely difficult. The filter may be abiogenesis itself, safely in our past. We got lucky at the beginning. The rest of the road, while challenging, may not contain anything as hard as the step we already cleared. But if we find life, even the simplest microbial life, the implications shift dramatically. If Mars once harbored bacteria, then the origin of life is not the filter. It happened independently on two planets in the same solar system. That would suggest abiogenesis is relatively easy, perhaps even inevitable on worlds with liquid water and organic chemistry. And if abiogenesis is easy, the filter must be somewhere else. The total difficulty of the chain has not changed. The silence of 2 trillion galaxies still needs an explanation. But now we know that the explanation does not involve the origin of life. The filter must sit further along the chain, in eukaryogenesis perhaps, in intelligence, in technology, or in survival. Each step we eliminate from the past pushes the remaining weight of the filter forward. If we ever find complex multicellular fossils on another world, the implications become deeply alarming, because it would mean that even the evolution of complexity is not the filter. Whatever is eliminating civilizations before they become visible must operate after that point, after intelligence, after technology, in the territory where we currently live. This is why NASA's Perseverance rover, trundling across the floor of Jezero crater on Mars, is conducting one of the most consequential experiments in human history, even though it does not look like one. In September 2025, NASA announced that a rock sample called Sapphire Canyon, drilled from an outcrop nicknamed Chayava Falls, contained what scientists described as a potential biosignature. The sample, collected in July 2024 from an ancient river valley, showed distinctive patterns of iron-rich minerals arranged in formations that planetary scientists nicknamed leopard spots. 2 specific minerals were identified: vivianite, an iron phosphate found on Earth around decomposing organic matter, and greigite, an iron sulfide produced by certain microorganisms. Both minerals were spatially associated with organic carbon in a configuration that, on Earth, is typically linked to microbial metabolism. A peer-reviewed paper published in Nature found no strong evidence for any of the abiotic explanations studied. This is not proof of life on Mars. NASA was careful to emphasize that the finding represents a potential biosignature, a chemical and mineralogical pattern consistent with biology, but not yet confirmed as biological in origin. The sample would need to be returned to Earth for the kind of detailed isotopic and structural analysis that a rover cannot perform. But even as a candidate, the Chayava Falls discovery sent a ripple of unease through the astrobiology community. Because if it is real, if those leopard spots were produced by ancient Martian microbes, then life arose independently on the planet next door. And that would mean abiogenesis is not rare. It would mean the filter is not at the beginning. It would push the weight of the great filter forward into the steps that come after, into the steps where we are now. In June 2026, additional findings from the same Bright Angel Formation strengthened the case further. Researchers reported the discovery of macromolecular carbon, complex organic compounds, at the highest concentration ever detected on Mars. The discovery was spatially associated with the same mineral patterns identified in the Chayava Falls analysis. 2 independent lines of evidence from the same geological formation, both consistent with biological activity, both requiring sample return for definitive interpretation. The evidence is not yet conclusive, but it is accumulating. Meanwhile, NASA's Europa Clipper spacecraft is en route to Jupiter's moon Europa, where a global ocean of liquid water exists beneath a shell of ice. The mission will not land on the surface, but it will conduct detailed flybys, mapping the moon's ice shell, analyzing material ejected from its surface through cracks and plumes, and searching for the chemical signatures that might indicate biological activity in the ocean below. If Europa harbors life, if a world with no sunlight and no atmosphere can produce living organisms from nothing but water, rock, and chemical energy, then the origin of life is almost certainly not the Great Filter. It would be something the universe does easily and often, and the terrifying question would shift from "how did life begin?" to "why does it always fail afterward?" This is the razor's edge. The more common life turns out to be, the more terrifying the silence becomes. Because the silence has not changed. 2 trillion galaxies still produce no detectable signals. Decades of searching still yield nothing. If life is easy and the universe is still quiet, then something is killing civilizations or preventing them from becoming visible. And that something operates after biology has done its work. The ahead filter does not require a single catastrophic mechanism. It does not need to be nuclear war or climate collapse or artificial intelligence or depopulation or temporal invisibility. It could be all of them acting in sequence or in combination, each one reducing the probability that any given civilization survives long enough to expand beyond its home world. A species might navigate nuclear weapons successfully but fall to climate instability. Another might solve climate challenges but be undone by engineered biology. A third might master all of these and still plateau technologically, settling into comfortable obscurity and never reaching for the stars. A fourth might advance past every technological danger but quietly depopulate itself out of existence over 5 centuries. A fifth might survive everything and broadcast for 50 years before going radio silent as its communications technology advances past the phase we can detect. The filter might not be a wall, it might be a fog, a gradually thickening haze of compounding risks that no civilization navigates completely. There is a narrow window in the development of any technological species, perhaps only a few centuries wide, during which it possesses the power to destroy itself but has not yet developed the means to survive beyond its home planet. Humanity entered that window in 1945. We have not yet exited it. Every civilization in the universe presumably passes through a similar window, and if the failure rate during that window is high enough, the silence rights itself. Millions of civilizations rise. Millions enter the window. Almost none emerge on the other side. We are inside the window right now. We have the bombs. We have the emissions. We have the engineered biology. We are building the artificial intelligence. We have not yet established a permanent, self-sustaining presence beyond Earth. We are exactly the kind of civilization that the ahead filter is designed to catch. And we have no way of knowing, from the inside, whether we are about to pass through it, or whether we are about to become another quiet world, orbiting another unremarkable star, in another unvisited corner of a galaxy that has already forgotten we were here. The evidence does not tell us which filter is real, but it tells us that the question is not abstract. It is the most urgent question our species has ever faced. And the answer may already be taking shape on the surface of Mars, in the oceans beneath Europa's ice, and in the choices we make in the decades ahead. What comes next will determine whether the Great Filter is something we study from the safe side of history, or something that studies us. We have walked through the full chain now, from dead chemistry to living cells, from simple organisms to complex ones, from complexity to intelligence, from intelligence to technology, and from technology to the precipice where a civilization either survives long enough to become visible or collapses back into silence. At every stage, there are plausible reasons to believe the step is hard enough to be the Great Filter, and at every stage, there are plausible reasons to believe it is not. The honest answer, the one that scientists are forced to live with, is that we do not yet know where the filter sits. We may not know for decades, and that uncertainty, more than any specific threat or any particular bottleneck, is what makes the Great Filter the most unsettling idea in the history of science. It is unsettling because the answer matters in a way that few scientific questions do. Most open problems in physics or biology are intellectually fascinating, but practically neutral. Whether dark matter consists of one type of particle or another does not change how you live your life. Whether a distant galaxy contains a supermassive black hole or a pair of merging neutron stars does not affect the decisions your civilization needs to make in the next 50 years. But the location of the Great Filter is different. If the filter is behind us, we are rare and precious, the survivors of a cosmic lottery so extreme that we may be functionally alone in the observable universe. If the filter is ahead, we are walking toward a cliff that we cannot yet see, and every year that passes without our species establishing a permanent foothold beyond Earth is a year in which the filter could close. This is not abstract cosmology. This is a question about whether your grandchildren inherit the stars or inherit the ruins. And right now, in this precise moment of history, the evidence is arriving. Not in some distant future, not in the next century. Now, multiple independent lines of investigation are converging on the question of how common life is in the universe, and the answers they produce will shift the weight of the Great Filter in ways that directly bear on humanity's prospects. The most dramatic of these investigations is playing out on Mars. As we discussed, NASA's Perseverance rover found a potential biosignature in September 2025, mineral patterns in the Chayava Falls rock that resemble the chemical fingerprints of microbial metabolism on Earth. The additional complex organic molecules discovered in the same formation in June 2026 strengthened the case further. But none of these findings prove that life existed on Mars. The peer-reviewed literature is careful to describe them as candidate biosignatures, patterns that are consistent with biological processes, but that could potentially be explained by abiotic chemistry as well. The strongest tests will require bringing the samples back to Earth, where laboratory instruments can perform the kind of isotopic, structural, and molecular analysis that a rover simply cannot. China's Tianwen-3 sample return mission, planned for launch no sooner than 2028, aims to collect Martian material and return it to Earth. NASA's own Mars Sample Return program, which would retrieve the specific samples Perseverance has cached in Jezero crater, has faced significant cost and schedule challenges. The political and budgetary future of that mission remains uncertain, but the scientific stakes could not be higher. If the Chayava Falls samples are returned and analysed, and if the mineral patterns and organic molecules are confirmed to be biological in origin, it would be among the most consequential scientific findings in human history. It would mean that life arose independently on two planets in the same solar system. And as we have seen, that finding would carry a shadow. It would mean the Great Filter is not abiogenesis. The origin of life is not the hard part, and the hard part, wherever it is, still lies somewhere along the chain. The search extends beyond Mars. The James Webb Space Telescope has opened a new chapter in the hunt for biosignatures on exoplanets. The most prominent target has been K2-18b, a sub-Neptune exoplanet orbiting in the habitable zone of a red dwarf star approximately 124 light-years from Earth. Some researchers have proposed that K2-18b could be a high-CN world, a planet with a hydrogen-rich atmosphere overlying a global liquid water ocean. In 2023, a team led by Niku Madhusudan at the University of Cambridge reported the detection of methane and carbon dioxide in K2-18b's atmosphere, along with a tentative hint of dimethyl sulfide, a molecule produced on Earth exclusively by marine organisms. In April 2025, the same team published new mid-infrared observations, strengthening the case for DMS and a related molecule, DMDS, at roughly 3 sigma statistical confidence, but the detection has been fiercely contested. Multiple independent reanalyses, published throughout 2025 by separate research groups, reach starkly different conclusions. A joint analysis of the full suite of web data by Luque and colleagues found insufficient evidence for DMS or DMDS, and demonstrated that various other molecules with similar chemical structures provided equally good fits to the observed spectra. Wellbanks and colleagues found no significant spectral features attributable to the claimed biosignatures. Taylor reached similar conclusions using independent methods. Photochemical modelling by Hugh and colleagues identified plausible abiotic formation pathways for DMS, and the molecule was even detected in the interstellar medium and in material from a comet, environments where no biology is involved. A NASA-led reanalysis, published in July 2025, using 4 new transit observations combined with the original data, confirmed the detections of methane and carbon dioxide, but found no conclusive evidence for DMS. As of 2026, the scientific community has broadly concluded that the evidence for a biological signal on K218b does not meet the standard required for a credible detection. The planet remains a fascinating target for atmospheric characterization, but it has not provided the definitive biosignature that headlines initially suggested. This cautionary tale is important because it illustrates just how difficult biosignature detection truly is. The challenge is not merely technological, it is inferential. Even when a telescope can measure the chemical composition of a distant planet's atmosphere with reasonable precision, interpreting that composition requires ruling out every plausible non-biological explanation. On a world we have never visited, with chemistry we may not fully understand, in an environment shaped by processes we cannot directly observe, that bar is extraordinarily high. The K218b episode demonstrated that even a 3 sigma detection of a promising molecule can dissolve under scrutiny when the molecular ambiguity is properly accounted for. Future biosignature claims will need to clear a much higher threshold, likely 5 sigma or above, and will need to be corroborated by multiple independent analyses before the scientific community will accept them. The next generation of telescopes may be able to meet that threshold. The Habitable Worlds Observatory, a flagship mission concept recommended by the most recent U.S. Decadal Survey for Astronomy, would be specifically designed to directly image Earth-like planets around Sun-like stars and measure their atmospheric compositions with sufficient precision to detect oxygen, ozone, water vapor, methane, and other potential biosignatures. The European Space Agency's Ariel mission, planned for launch in 2029, will conduct a large-scale survey of exoplanet atmospheres, characterizing 1,000 worlds across a range of sizes and orbital distances. Ground-based observatories with enormous primary mirrors, including telescopes with apertures exceeding 30 meters, will bring unprecedented resolving power to atmospheric spectroscopy. These instruments will not provide instant answers. They will produce data that must be carefully analyzed, debated, and verified, but they will dramatically expand the number of worlds we can examine for signs of biological activity, and each detection, or each non-detection, will add weight to one side or the other of the great filter question. If planet after planet shows no trace of life, the filter in the past hypothesis grows stronger. Abiogenesis is rare. We are lucky. The silence is explained. If biosignatures begin appearing on multiple worlds, the filter must lie elsewhere, and the search for its location becomes more urgent. There is a third possibility that rarely gets discussed but may ultimately prove closest to the truth. The great filter might not be a single step at all. It might not be one wall that blocks the path. Instead, it might be distributed across the entire chain, a series of partial barriers, each one reducing the number of civilizations that advance to the next stage. Abiogenesis might be moderately difficult, not impossible, but far from guaranteed. Eukaryogenesis might be independently improbable. The evolution of intelligence might fail on most complex worlds, and technological civilizations might destroy themselves at a significant but not overwhelming rate. No single step needs to be impossibly hard. But if each step has a low probability of success, and there are many steps, the cumulative probability of traversing the entire chain becomes vanishingly small. Consider the arithmetic. A 90% chance of passing each of 10 sequential filters sounds forgiving. But 10 such filters in sequence yield a total passage rate of roughly 35%. Make it a 50% chance at each of 15 steps, and the cumulative probability drops below 1 in 30,000. 20 steps at 50% each gives 1 in a million. 30 steps at 50% each gives 1 in a billion. The numbers collapse with breathtaking speed. You do not need any single step to be miraculous. You just need enough steps, each one moderately difficult, and the cumulative effect does the work of a miracle all by itself. This distributed filter model has an elegant feature. It explains the silence without requiring any single step to be impossibly hard. It is consistent with the observation that every step in Earth's history was difficult, but not obviously impossible. Life arose, but it took specific conditions. Complex cells evolved, but only once. Intelligence appeared, but in only one lineage. Technology developed, but in only one species. Survival remains uncertain, but we have not yet destroyed ourselves. Each of these steps is improbable. None is individually absurd, but chained together, they produce a path so narrow that almost no world completes it. The galaxy, under this model, fills with partial successes. Imagine the variety. Some worlds produce only amino acids, complex organic chemistry swirling in warm oceans for billions of years without ever crossing the threshold into self-replication. They are rich with potential and entirely dead. Others evolve rich ecosystems of microbial life that persist for billions of years without ever producing a complex cell. Their atmospheres show biosignatures, oxygen and methane coexisting in chemical disequilibrium, but there is no one there to know it. Others develop forests and oceans and elaborate food webs, but never spark a nervous system sophisticated enough to ask questions about the stars. They are worlds of beauty and silence, teeming with life that will never look up. Imagine a world covered entirely in ocean, where multicellular life evolved and flourished for hundreds of millions of years. Creatures with complex body plans, intelligence, social behavior, but the planet has no continents, no land, no dry surface anywhere. Evolution on this world has produced the equivalent of dolphins, organisms with large brains, sophisticated communication, deep social bonds, and absolutely no path to technology. Fire is impossible in water. Metallurgy requires heat that no ocean permits. Electronics cannot function in a conductive fluid. This world teems with intelligent life. It will never produce a single artifact detectable from space. It will remain silent forever, not because its inhabitants lack curiosity or desire, but because the physics of their environment makes technology impossible. They may wonder about the stars. They can never reach them. Imagine another world where a species evolved with extraordinary individual memory, but no capacity for symbolic language. Every member of this species can recall everything it has ever experienced with perfect fidelity. But it cannot externalize that knowledge. It cannot write. It cannot speak in abstractions. It cannot tell another member of its species how to build something it has built before. Every individual starts with its own experiences alone. Knowledge cannot accumulate across generations because it cannot be transferred. This species may produce individuals of extraordinary capability, beings that independently discover principles of physics, chemistry, even rudimentary mathematics, through personal observation, but each one dies with its knowledge intact and unshared. The next generation begins from nothing. Progress is impossible. Civilization is impossible. The species is brilliant and permanently stuck, locked in an eternal present where every generation rediscovers what the last generation learned and lost. And others, perhaps the ones most like us, build civilizations and write poetry and launch satellites, and then stumble, quietly, into one of the many traps that lie between early technology and permanent expansion. A war, a plague, a technology that could not be controlled, a population that stopped sustaining itself, a communication system that advanced past the window of detectability. Each of these outcomes is a world that tried and fell short. Each one contributed to the silence in its own way. The universe is not empty because of one great war. It is empty because of 1,000 smaller ones, stacked end to end, each taking its toll. This interpretation changes the emotional texture of the silence. Under a single filter model, the cosmos is either a wasteland of failed chemistry or a graveyard of destroyed civilizations. Under the distributed model, it is something harder to name, a landscape of near misses, a cosmos littered with incomplete journeys, each one reaching a different point along the chain before falling still. The silence is not uniform. It is layered. It is a composite of 1 billion different kinds of failure, each one unique, each one final. And this is where the great filter ceases to be merely a scientific hypothesis and becomes something closer to a mirror, because the question it asks is not really about aliens, it is about us. When you stand beneath a clear night sky and feel the immensity of what surrounds you, the great filter is what transforms that feeling from wonder into dread. It is the suspicion that all those points of light, all those billions of potential homes, All those worlds with water and carbon and warmth are graveyards. Not the kind with headstones. The kind where nothing remains at all. No ruins, no artifacts, no fossils of alien civilizations. Just rock and ice and silence, extending in every direction, forever. The universe does not owe us an explanation for its emptiness. It does not owe us company. The silence is not a message. It is not a warning. It is simply what the cosmos sounds like when the path from chemistry to civilization is long enough and hard enough that almost nothing completes it. And we, sitting at our particular point along that path, with our particular set of risks and our particular window of opportunity, have no way to know from the inside whether we are the exception or the rule, whether we are the ones who made it through, or the ones who are about to join the quiet. Robin Hanson, when he first formalized the Great Filter in 1996, understood this ambiguity and leaned into it. He argued that humanity should hope to find the universe barren. We should hope that Mars is dead. We should hope that Europa's ocean is sterile. We should hope that every exoplanet atmosphere shows nothing but carbon dioxide and nitrogen and the ordinary chemistry of lifeless worlds. Because every dead world we find is evidence that the filter is behind us. Every empty ocean is a data point suggesting that the hard part was biology, not civilization. And if biology is the hard part, then we have already won. The opposite discovery, life on another world, should fill us not with celebration, but with deep unease. Because each independent origin of life we find diminishes the probability that abiogenesis is the filter. And if it is not the filter, then something else is. Something further along the chain. Something that catches civilizations after they develop. Something waiting. This logic is counterintuitive. Our instinct is to celebrate the discovery of alien life as a triumph, proof that we are not alone, validation that the universe is alive and full and generous. And on a purely emotional level, it would be exactly that. But on the level of existential risk, it would be a warning sign. The more common life is, the louder the silence screams. Because 2 trillion galaxies worth of silence, explained by rare biology, is a solved puzzle. 2 trillion galaxies worth of silence in a universe where biology is common is an unsolved catastrophe. It means something is destroying or suppressing what biology creates, and we have no reason to believe we are immune. No other scientific discovery in history carries this kind of double-edged emotional weight. Humanity simultaneously wants to find life for deep and legitimate reasons, because the loneliness of being the only minds in a cosmos this vast is almost too heavy to bear. We ache for company. We ache for validation that what happened on Earth was not a fluke so improbable that it borders on meaningless. We want to know that the universe is fertile, that it cares about complexity, that intelligence is a feature of the cosmos rather than an accident. And yet the logic of the Great Filter tells us that we should dread exactly the discovery we most desire. The joy of learning we are not alone, and the terror of what that implies about our future, would arrive in the same moment, inseparable, permanent. It would be the most wonderful and the most frightening news our species has ever received, delivered in a single breath. No other question in science works this way. No other answer could simultaneously fill us with hope and dread in equal measure. And it is a question that the next generation of telescopes, rovers, and missions may answer within our lifetimes. Humanity occupies a peculiar position in this story. We are the first and only species on this planet to develop the tools needed to even ask the question. We can detect exoplanets, analyze their atmospheres, search for radio signals, send rovers to other worlds, and model the probabilities of our own extinction. No other organism in the history of Earth has possessed these capabilities, and those capabilities give us something that is simultaneously a gift and a burden. Awareness. We are aware of the silence. We are aware of the scale. We are aware that the universe has been running the experiment of life for nearly 14 billion years across trillions of galaxies, and that, so far as we can determine, the experiment has produced exactly one civilization capable of recognizing what the experiment is. Whether that makes us miraculous or merely early, whether we are the first to succeed or just the next in a long line of failures who have not yet failed, we cannot say. What we can say is that the Great Filter, whatever it is, wherever it sits, is not a law of physics that forbids success. It is a probability distribution that makes success extremely rare. And probabilities, unlike laws, can be beaten. Every step in the chain behind us was beaten at least once. By us, on this world, through a combination of chemical accidents, evolutionary flukes, geological luck, and choices made by organisms that had no idea what was at stake. The steps ahead are different because they involve choices we can actually make with full knowledge of the consequences. We know about nuclear weapons. We know about climate destabilization. We know about the risks of advanced artificial intelligence and engineered pathogens. We know, or are beginning to learn, about the demographic pressures that could slowly erode a technological civilization from within. These are not blind forces. They are challenges that admit solutions, if the civilization facing them is wise enough and motivated enough and cooperative enough to implement those solutions in time. The Great Filter does not prove we are doomed. It does not prove we are safe. It proves only that the journey is long and that the path is narrow, and that most who attempt it do not finish. But it also proves, through the sheer fact of our existence, that finishing is not impossible. Something made it this far. We are that something. Whether we make it further depends on decisions that have not yet been made, by people who have not yet been born, facing challenges that have not yet fully materialized. The filter is real. The outcome is not yet written. There is a final thought that lives at the very bottom of this question. Beneath all the statistics and the evolutionary biology and the existential risk analysis, it is not a scientific thought. It is something closer to a feeling. It sits in the chest when you look up at the night sky and understand, really understand, what the silence means. Every star you see might have planets. Some of those planets might have had oceans. Some of those oceans might have harbored life. Some of that life might have become complex. Some of that complexity might have produced minds capable of wonder, and some of those minds might have built civilizations that dreamed of reaching the stars, just as we dream now. They might have developed mathematics and music and medicine. They might have loved their children and feared their deaths, and looked up at a sky full of the same stars you are looking at and wondered the same thing. Where is everybody? And then they were gone, not in a dramatic explosion, not in a cinematic collapse, perhaps just slowly, gradually. A war that could not be stopped, a climate that could not be stabilized, a technology that could not be controlled, a population that could not sustain itself, or something we have not imagined, something that no species recognizes until it is too late. Their radio signals faded, their lights went out, their planet continued orbiting its star, as indifferent as it was before anyone lived there. The rocks remained, the water remained, but the minds were gone, and the universe did not notice. That is the horror of the Great Filter. Not that it kills, but that it erases. It removes civilizations so completely that there is no evidence they ever existed. No monuments survive. No transmissions persist. No artifacts endure across the timescales the cosmos operates on. The galaxy recycles their atoms into new stars and new planets that will never know what came before. The silence is not a void where nothing has happened. It may be an ocean of loss so total that it looks exactly like emptiness. We cannot know this for certain. It is possible that the silence really is emptiness, that life is so rare and intelligence so improbable that we are genuinely alone in the observable universe, the only minds in 100 billion light-years of space, a single candle in an infinite dark room. That would make us not just rare but sacred, the only point in all of existence where matter has organized itself into something that can look at the rest of matter and ask why. If that is the truth, then everything we do matters in a way that no philosophy has ever fully articulated. Every choice, every discovery, every act of kindness or cruelty reverberates through a universe that has no other witness. We are the cosmos looking at itself, and if we disappear, the looking stops. Or it is possible that the silence is indeed an ocean of loss, that billions of civilizations have risen and fallen across the history of the universe, each one believing itself destined for greatness, each one unaware that the filter was closing around it. In that case, we are not alone in the deepest sense. We are the latest in a long procession of minds that have emerged from the cosmic noise, burned briefly, and faded. The difference is that we are the first, as far as we know, to understand what the procession means. We are the first to see the filter clearly enough to name it, and we may be the first to have a genuine choice about whether to pass through it or be consumed by it. The Great Filter does not tell us what to do, it tells us what is at stake. It tells us that the universe has been running this experiment for a very long time, and that the results so far are almost uniformly negative. It tells us that intelligence alone is not enough, that technology alone is not enough, that even the fierce desire to survive may not be enough. Something more is required, something that no species in the history of the cosmos, as far as we can tell, has yet fully provided. We do not know what that something is. We do not know if we have it. We do not know if it is a quality that can be cultivated or whether it is simply luck, the right asteroid missing by a wider margin, the right treaty signed one day sooner, the right technology developed before the wrong one becomes unstoppable. We do not know if the filter is a wall or a fog, a single catastrophic moment, or a slow grinding attrition that wears civilizations down over centuries. All we know is that the universe is silent, that the silence demands an explanation, that every explanation we can construct leads to the same conclusion. The path from here to the stars is not guaranteed. It is not even likely. It is the rarest thing in the cosmos, and we are on it, right now, at this moment, balanced between the filters we have already passed and the ones that may still lie ahead. Look up tonight, count the stars, and understand that behind every point of light, the universe is asking the same question it has asked for 14 billion years. A question that, so far, only silence has answered. The Great Filter does not care whether we find it frightening or beautiful or unfair. It simply is. And we are the ones who get to decide, in this brief window, whether humanity becomes the exception or the rule, whether the silence finally gets an answer, or whether we add our own small quiet to the dark.